At dawn on my porch, the courier wouldn't commit a full step. The blue stamp, Notice of Violation and Eviction, bled like a bruise. I slid the 1923 water deed beside it. "I'll sign for the paper," I said, "not the story it's trying to tell." "What am I acknowledging?" I asked. He squinted at the carbonless forms. A Notice of Violation and Eviction. Also, a special assessment schedule. I took the pen, but not the bait. Eviction. From where exactly? From the parcel described in Exhibit A. He tapped a stapled packet with a plastic nail. "Sir, I'm just delivering." The blue stamp bled through the top sheet. Notice of Violation and Eviction. Its square edges colder than the morning. Cicadas wound up in the live oaks. The porch fan ticked like a metronome practicing patience. I set the clipboard on the table, reached under the bench for the flat tin box I keep where the sun can't find it, and slid out the 1923 water deed. I placed it beside the notice so the courier could see the embossed seal. He leaned in. "Is that original?" I said. "Senior rights to Willowbend Creek and associated flows." He swallowed. I just need your signature." "What's your name?" I asked. "Derek." He shifted. The lanyard badge smacked his chest when a little gust came through the screens. "Derek, tell whoever sent you I signed for the paper, not for the story it's trying to tell." I scrawled my name on his line, added the date, and handed the clipboard back. He hesitated, eyes on the deed. "They told me there'd be construction noise for a while. Don't call the sheriff unless it's, safety." "I'll call when it's safety," I said, "and when it's law." Derek nodded, retreated down the steps, and nearly tripped over the iron gate. The gate sensor beeped twice, then cut off like it was holding its breath. Beyond the mesquite, the dam showed a low, clean lip of concrete. Dragonflies hovered where the spillway throat darkened, which meant the water still had depth. A faint chemical smell rode the breeze diesel from somewhere it shouldn't be. Inside, the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and dust. I laid Pop's leather journal and the water deed side by side on the table. Pop had written in square, careful letters. Dam inspections. Rainfall notes, names of neighbors who needed extra water in 81 and 96. I set today's notice on top of his entry for spring maintenance light grease on spillway wheel. My phone buzzed with a county number. I answered on speaker. "Is this Mr. Caleb Rourke?" a woman asked. "It is. This is Amy with the clerk's office. I see you accepted a notice. Do you have any questions for recording?" "I have one for the record," I said. "Who authorized an eviction on property I hold free and clear?" "Sir, the notice lists Willowbend Meadows HOA as the complainant. It's tied to a pending development. An HOA can evict a man from his own ranch." "I'm not an attorney," she said slower now, "but there's also a zoning attachment. The council's stamp is on it. Send me the public copy by email." "Yes, sir. And Mr. Rourke, yes, there's a placeholder line on the parcel ID. It might be nothing. I'd keep all your documents handy. I keep them where I can find them," I said, and ended the call. I turned Pop's journal toward the light. In the margin of 1978, he'd pasted a tiny newspaper cutting, "Army Corps helps local dam design." A coffee ring half obscured the headline like a partial eclipse. I ran a finger down the deed's embossed seal. The paper was thick and slightly oily like it had soaked up a century of hands. The porch boards creaked. Mrs. Chen's orange tabby property of no one slipped inside like an apology and curled on the cool tile. I set the kettle on and dialed the number on the bottom of the notice. "Willowbend Meadows. How may I direct your call?" a cheerful voice said. "Development office," I said. "One moment." The line filled with a piano loop, sunny as a brochure. A man picked up. "This is Todd, project coordinator." "Mr. Todd," I said, "you've posted a notice of violation and eviction on my ranch. Before we get acquainted, tell me where your crews intend to stage." "We're staging along the north fence," he said. Paper shuffled. "Phase A, perimeter. Do you have a drainage plan you can email me? That's handled by the contractor." "Sir, are you objecting to the notice I'm documenting it?" I said. "And for the record, the north fence crosses my cattle easement and my spillway access road." "Spillway. This is a residential build," he said. "Noted," I said, and let the silence do the rest. He cleared his throat. "You'll want to attend the HOA board meeting Thursday. Public comment at the end." "I'll add it to my calendar," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed in their calendar any more than I believed in their fence. I hung up, poured hot water over the old grounds, tasted bitterness like a metal penny, and decided it was fitting. The gate sensor chirped again. I grabbed my hat and the keys and stepped into the heat. The fence line along the north pasture looked like someone had draped the prairie in party ribbon-painted stakes, every 20 feet fluorescent tape popping in the sun. A survey flag had snagged on a clump of blue stem and snapped at the wind like tethered pride. Two men in orange vests paused mid-conversation when I pulled up. "Morning," I said. "Morning," one said. "You the owner I am." "Caleb." "Just laying out Phase A," he said, reading from a tablet without looking at me. "What's Phase A?" I asked, though I knew the word for it now. "First 25, he said. "Road utilities pads. The homes go fast once the dirt's right." I aimed my phone at the stakes and took photos, each one with a timestamp and a brief note. Flag at 34 N fence. Sandbags at creek inlet, PVC elbow under willow. The creek sounded thinner than it should. A dragonfly stitched an invisible seam above the water as if to hold it together by will. "Who moved that elbow in?" I asked. "Temporary redirection," the other man said, already walking. "Redirection from where to where I said. You can check the plan online," he called back, "or with the HOA. I knelt and touched the sandbag. The fabric left a faint powder on my fingertips. Diesel, again a thin line of sheen trembling where the bank met the slow pool. I took a photo and another breath and stood while my knees reminded me I wasn't 30 anymore. On the gravel by the cattle gate, a temporary sightboard slanted against a T-post, fresh vinyl letters. Factory Perfect Willow Bend Meadows. Phase A, 25 homes. The HOA emblem, a stylized live oak with two perfect symmetry, shone like a dare in the noon light. For a second, the ranch went strangely quiet, the way a room does when someone says something so confident you have to replay it to believe it. I called Amy back. "Clerk's office," she said. Amy speaking. "Quick question," I said. "The development sign says 25 homes. Does your file match that? Let me see." "Yes, 25 in Phase A," she said. "And a stormwater amendment pending. Mr. Rourke, do you want me to flag your parcel for any changes? Please do. And could you send me the council minutes where this was approved? I'll attach them," she said. Then lowered her voice. "There's a line item about community safety. You should read the comments. I read everything I said. Back at the house, the cat followed me in like a shadow with opinions. I set the notice beneath a paperweight shaped like a river stone and slid the deed and journal back into the tin. I cleaned my hands with a shop towel and stood for a while at the screen door watching light catch on the spillway's steel handwheel. A brass valve tag hung from my keyring, thin edges rubbed smooth by time. I turned it over with my thumb, the same number stamped on the lever housing at the dam, and felt the familiar steady weight of what Pop always called the neighbor's job. The phone buzzed again, another number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Some conversations needed a table, not a wire. I stepped onto the porch. Heat shimmered over the gravel. Down by the oaks, a truck door slammed and laughter drifted up like a challenge. I rubbed the valve tag and spoke to no one in particular. Not today. The gate answered with a single long beep as if it agreed. The rebar in the truck bed ticked against the tailgate like cheap wind chimes as a pack of orange vests fanned across my north pasture. Dust rose in bands. A white golf cart nosed along the silt fence and stopped with a little triumphant chirp. "Good morning," the woman said, voice bright enough to bleach the sky. "Vivian Mallory, HOA, President." She removed one glove the way a TV anchor removes a lapel mic and offered her hand. Sunglasses like tea saucers hid most of her face, but I could feel the smile. "Caleb Rourke," I said, keeping my hand on the fence post. "Who's your general contractor?" "We partner," she said. "Community-driven build. You'll love the vision." She swept a hand toward the field where survey flags fluttered like bunting at a parade for someone I didn't vote for. "Vision comes with a drainage plan," I said. "Where is it?" A foreman in a sun-faded cap sauntered over, already shaking his head. "You can see the zoning change notice right there, sir." He pointed to a plastic sleeve zip-tied to the fence. Inside, a photocopy bore my parcel ID and a council stamp that looked like it had been pressed in a hurry. "That's zoning," I said. "I asked about drainage. The engineer's handling submittals," he said, checking his phone. "We're within the covenants and municipal code. Which covenants cover diverting a creek?" I asked. Vivian's smile never dipped. "Let's not get adversarial on such a beautiful morning. We have an approved grading permit. Our families have been waiting for homes. The board evaluated the bylaws, the architectural guidelines, and a third-party environmental memo. It's all very above board." The words "above board" landed with a soft thud in the dust. I took out my phone and held it in plain sight. "For my records." Name of the G.C. Mallory Communities, the foreman said, then winced like he'd caught his lip in a zipper. Vivian's sunglasses dipped just enough to flash a warning. We coordinate, she said. This is a homeowner's project. We're not a developer, we're a steward. Stewardship usually means you return what you borrow, I said, including water. I snapped a photo of the laminated grading permit sign bolted to a T-post date permit number, a contact line that dumped to a voicemail last time I tried it. Who's your insurer? I asked. That's not required for your review, the foreman said. Sir, we're in our right of entry window and need to keep moving. You're on my cattle easement, I said. Easements under reconsideration, Vivian said lightly. We all want safe, beautiful streets. Think about property values. We've had tremendous interest, young families, first-time buyers, folks aging in place. The board believes this Phase A will be a jewel. I held up a hand. Phase A. She tilted her head, then turned to the foreman as if I had misheard. Honey, can you explain the schedule? Mr. Rourke likes details. He tucked his phone into a pocket. Road cut this week. Utilities next. Pads after. Then the first 25 rooftops by Christmas. Vivian finished a smile returning like a song she never forgot. It sounded rehearsed. I tapped the recorder app and marked the moment. 25, I repeated. And the creek. We're stabilizing it, the foreman said. Temporary measures. Best practice. Show me, I said. We walked to the cypress where Pop had painted a staff gauge decades back. The waterline licked an inch lower than August should allow. A little PVC elbow hid in the shade under root mass, a handful of sandbags banking the flow like a thumb on a garden hose. The current wore a skinny, tired face. That elbow wasn't here last week, I said. Temporary, like I said. The foreman answered. We're preventing erosion while we shape the bank to our BMPs. Best management practices, Vivian chimed. See? We speak fluent compliance. She laughed softly like a spoon in a teacup. Compliance talks in documents, I said, sliding a pocket flow gauge into the current. The needle quivered, settled low. I wrote the number in my notebook beside today's date and time. Who approved rerouting is such a dramatic word, Vivian said. We're enhancing the flow path for safety. Safety for whom, I asked. For the children, she said almost tenderly. We all care about children. I looked up. The drone word dipped and rose again like a wasp reconsidering a sting. Is that yours? I said. Neighbors, Vivian said. People are curious. They love seeing progress. Progress has a permit trail, I said. So let's put things on record. G.C. Mallory Communities foreman. Dale, he muttered. Insurer handled, he said. Drainage plan contact. The engineer, he said. Name. A long pause. Vivian's sunglasses tilted. Mr. Rourke, you can submit a formal records request. The board will respond within 30 days as provided by the bylaws. 30 days will put you at pads, I said. Unless we move faster, she said, cheerful again. Phase A is the easy part, 25 rooftops by Christmas. This time she set it to my phone as if to sign the quote. That's helpful, I said, and saved the file. She glanced toward my pickup where a county sticker still clung to the windshield from a brand inspection last spring. You know we welcome legacy residents at our community meetings. Tonight we're discussing architectural harmony and fence uniformity. If you bring concerns in the right spirit, I'm sure we can find consensus. Consensus, I said. Is that before or after you staple eviction notices to my porch? That's not an eviction, she said sweetly. That's a compliance pathway. You have options. Our special assessment schedule is very reasonable. The one that evicts me if I don't pay to move my own fence, I asked. We don't evict, she said, giving the word air quotes with 2 manicured fingers. We enforce. It keeps everyone's equity safe. The creek gave a soft, involuntary burp over the elbow. I glanced at the gauge again. The number was a hair lower than it had been 2 minutes ago. Maybe the sun, maybe the thumb on the hose. Do not move the elbow, the foreman said quickly. It's part of our temporary measures. I'm not touching your thumb, I said. I'm writing down that it's there. Vivian's smile cooled. Mr. Rourke, it would be a shame to start this relationship combative. The board's mission statement is neighbors helping neighbors. Pop used to say the same I said. He just didn't need a mission statement to do it. She folded her glove back on. We'll take wonderful care of this land. It already has someone to do that, I said. The rebar ticked again as 2 more pallets clanked off a forklift. Dust drifted over the pasture and made the fence look like old bone. I took photos of the grading sign, the zoning change notice, the elbow, the sandbags, and the flags. Each click felt like tapping a nail into a board I would need later. Back at my truck, the heat made the dashboard vinyl smell like a new boot. My phone buzzed with a county portal notification, owner of record discrepancy. Bold letters, unhelpful link. I looked toward the creek where the staff gauge sat like a truth teller, and then back to the dust eating the pasture. Vivian pulled up beside my door engine, whispering, "I'll see you at the meeting," she said. "I'll see you in the records I said." She laughed a bell without weight and drove off the golf cart's tires, sketching polite curlicues in my gravel. The notification pulsed again. I opened it with my thumb. Owner of record, it repeated, and then, like a breadcrumb I hadn't asked for, a little gray note, pending update. I stared at the word pending until the screen dimmed and the drone's buzz slid away into the heat. The diner smelled like burnt sugar and bacon, a sweetness that clung to the chrome like a memory. Doc Keene sat in a corner booth under the swamp cooler and folded the Willow Bend Herald so only the headline showed, "Home starts surge on ranch land." He tapped the rim of my 1978 dam permit copy with the blunt edge of a butter knife the way a judge might tap a bench before speaking. "You brought the good paper," he said. "Brought all the paper," I said, sliding a manila folder across the formica. "I need a ladder out of a hole. Let's find rungs." He licked a thumb, opened the permit, and drew a slow breath that smelled faintly of courthouse air and peppermint. "Look here, Caleb. Federal Oversight Watershed Coordination. It's not just design help, it's a handshake with jurisdiction. Handshake beats a golf clap," I said. He smiled. "Save the applause for later. This language." He circled a paragraph with his pen, blue ink bleeding a tidy halo. "References a seasonal flow preservation clause. That tells me there's an agricultural covenant floating around, maybe recorded with a different index." Pop pasted a core article in his journal, I said. And he swore by flood seasons like they were church holidays. Doc's eyes moved to the wall above my shoulder. A Sienna photograph of the creek in flood 1981, water shouldering into the old channel right where glossy brochures now placed back decks and playsets. The waitress set 2 mugs down without asking and said, "Top-offs run free today," and then drifted away watering strangers like potted plants. Doc tapped the permit again. 2 rails to run on. Design lineage gives you a federal hook. Agricultural covenant gives you duty. The 3rd rail is your 1923 deed. I eased the deed from its plastic sleeve. The paper had that dense old feel like it kept its own counsel. He ran a careful finger along the embossed seal. "Your family has senior rights," he said. His whistle was soft and satisfied. He reached for a napkin and wrote in block letters, "Senior rights outrank HOA bylaws." He underlined outrank twice. Those 3 in that order make most HOA presidents forget their Facebook passwords. "Vivian doesn't forget much," I said. "Then we help her remember the right things." He lifted the permit again. "Read me the covenant block." I picked out the lines, careful not to turn it into sermon. "Seasonal flows maintained to preserve downstream agricultural rights." He raised a finger. "Stop there. It says maintained, not allowed if convenient. That's duty, not courtesy." The waitress refilled our cups, steam drifting into the cool air. Doc took a sip and made a face. "Still tastes like coffee that lost an argument." "Familiar," I said. "Homework," he said, capping his pen. "We build a prep list before you show your face at any board meeting." 1 trail, cameras on the fence line label with date and time. 2 certified letters, Fire Department, County Emergency Management, downstream neighbors, stating you're maintaining seasonal flow under covenant. 3 flow logs at fixed staff gauge readings morning and evening. 4, draft a call script for EPA intake. You're seeking guidance on compliance with seasonal flow and suspect unpermitted diversion. "Short and boring," I said. "Boring wins," he said. He tore a clean napkin and wrote the skeleton of a script. Name, property, permit year. Covenant language observed diversion request, inspector, guidance. Read it, don't improvise. My phone buzzed on the table. Next door, push the sentence clipped is our dam, and then it hid the rest behind an ellipsis. Doc eyed the screen. "They're writing your biography without you. They'll need better sources," I said, flipping the phone face down. He slid a thin binder toward me, letter templates he'd been carrying around like a squirrel stashing nuts. "I keep these for pro bono days," he said. "Swap the names and parcel numbers. Get your green cards back on the certifieds." I scanned the language. The sentences were plain and sturdy as fence posts. You do this a lot. Often enough I should open a punch card, he said. Fifth Covenant, consult free. Appreciate the discount. You'll pay me in brisket one day. He checked the permit again, then pointed with the knife. We need a line in your letters about safety, not drama. Safety. You've got a spillway designed for that, so we're doing what the paper says we should do. Maintain, I said. Right, not weaponize, not threaten, not grandstand. He flicked a glance at me like he could smell an engineer's urge to over-demonstrate. You'll be tempted to script a show. Don't. Script compliance. I can script patience, I said. It's not as cinematic. Cameras love quiet truth, he said. Speaking of narration planned for cameras, when you inevitably have to operate, you say the same 6 sentences. I'm performing seasonal maintenance under a 1978 permit and agricultural covenant. Downstream notices sent. Flow monitored. Fire department notified. Safety perimeter posted. Questions to EPA case number X. Then shut up. 6 sentences, I repeated. He held up 6 fingers, then folded one. You do not add an opinion about character. You do not say her name. Vivian will say mine, I said. Then the contrast does the talking. The swamp cooler coughed and exhaled a damp lungful. Somewhere behind the grill, the cook banged a pan like a gavel. I pulled Pop's journal from the folder and laid it open to the page where he'd taped the clipping, Army Corps helps local dam design. Below it, his tidy pencil. Share water, share the burden. Wheel turns easier together. The sentence put a little pressure on my throat. Doc watched me read. He understood covenant better than most lawyers, he said. He understood neighbors, I said. Same thing when done right. He flipped the napkin and drafted a sketch of the creek, a cartoon spine with ribs. Put cams here and here, he said, jabbing where the bank tucked into willow shadow and where the fence angled toward the culvert, and here to catch sandbag movements. Signage. Caution, seasonal spillway, maintenance, do not tamper. Keep copies for your file. Photograph every sign you post. Timestamp geotag if you can. Certified letters by tomorrow, I said, checking boxes in my notebook. Trail cams today. Flow logs morning and evening. EPA script at lunch. And one more, he said softer. Call your sister. Make sure she understands this isn't feuding, it's stewardship. She'll read headlines before she reads covenants. She reads everything I said, but yes. The waitress slid a plate of pie onto our table like we'd earned it, then topped us off again. A pair of older men at the counter marked their place in the gossip by nodding when our eyes met and then not looking our way again. Doc leaned back, capped his pen with a click that felt like a closure. Caleb, if the old covenant exists, you don't just own water, you're tasked to let it flow seasonally. He let the sentence sit there between us like a key laid in the open. That's your leverage. Not against people, against the story that says you're a problem. I prefer being a solution, I said. Solutions are boring in the best way. Go be dull and correct. He slid the napkin into my folder as if it were a notarized document. The swamp cooler hiccuped. The chrome stools squeaked as a family folded out of a booth near the door. We paid left too much tip and walked out into air that had traded spring for something heavier. Along the horizon, a cloud shelf had bruised itself purple, a line of weather sharpening the world. The sidewalk radiated heat through my soles. My phone lit again. The next door thread was fully visible now as our damn safe a pin icon parked right on my address. Under it, a reply count spiked like a fever chart. Doc shaded his eyes. You want me to tell you to stay off the comments I already know, I said. Good, he said. Let your paper speak. He squeezed my shoulder and headed toward the courthouse. I stood on the curb and watched the thread count climb while wind pushed a paper napkin into the gutter and plastered it there like a small white flag. I didn't touch the post. I slid the folder under my arm, felt the old permit stiff against my ribs, and walked toward my truck to buy trail cameras, thinking of Pop's penciled line and how a wheel turns easiest when it's supposed to. Blue and white light pulsed across my porch ceiling as if the sky were breathing. 2 figures stepped through the gate shoes squeaking on wet boards, clipboards held like peace offerings. Mr. Rourke, the woman said. Her parka hood framed kind eyes. I'm Dana from Behavioral Health. This is Deputy Lewis. We're here for a wellness check. Come on up, I said. You'll want to stay under the eave. It spits when it drizzles. The deputy nodded at my camera lanyard. Are you recording today? I record when there's paper, I said, and tapped the red light. What prompted the check? Dana glanced down. Multiple community concerns posted online. We're required to follow up. Next door, I said. She gave the smallest shrug. Social media can be... Amplifying? Ask what you need to ask, I said. She smoothed a page already dotted with checkboxes. Are you having thoughts of harming yourself or others? No, ma'am. Any weapons on the premises? Fence tools a crescent wrench and an old shop broom that's lost half its hair. You can list no firearms. Have you been sleeping? Enough to be cranky, not enough to be unkind. Dana's pen paused. Support system. My sister calls every Sunday. Neighbors bring tamales when they want to pry about the weather. Deputy Lewis shifted his duty belt. We got reports you're planning to open the dam in anger. In maintenance, I said. Under a permit and covenant, you can read before you leave. He looked at Dana. She nodded. Could we see the documents? I fetched the folder from the hall table. Here's the 1978 permit copy. And Pop's journal entry on seasonal flow. This is the 1923 deed. The deputy skimmed the permit, then rubbed a thumb across the raised seal on the deed as if truth might have a texture. You do have paper. I also have a creek falling by inches, I said. You can note that. Dana slid me a form. If you'll initial each page, please. I'll email you the wellness check transcript by 5 p.m. I'm marking no immediate risk and no further action required. Thank you, I said. I'd like your badge numbers for the file. BH2046, she said. TR77, the deputy said. He flipped his notebook shut. You're reasonable, Mr. Rourke. Maybe take a break from reading what strangers write. Strangers used my name, I said. I'll use my documents. A golf cart idled beyond the easement, a white comma in the gray drizzle. Vivian sat inside, phone held high at just the angle to crop out the flashing lights and crop in my porch. When our eyes met, she waved like we were old friends at a parade. Morning, Mr. Rourke, she called. We care, that's all. Then stop tampering with the creek, I said back, keeping my voice level. She cupped a hand to her ear, smile unbudging. What's that? Can't hear over the rain. Dana touched my sleeve. We're done here, she said quietly. If you get harassed, call us. I'll call when it's safety, I said, and when it's law. They left damp boot prints down the steps. The gate gave its polite beep, then fell back to drizzle and cicadas tucked in their winter silence. Inside, I set the folder on the counter and opened next door. The thread had grown a new limb while we talked, unstable, dangerous, obsessed with control of his creek. A side-by-side photo showed my dam on the left and on the right a stock image of catastrophic flooding from somewhere coastal. Under it, a caption, "This is what he wants." I put the phone face down and breathed against the urge to answer an echo chamber. Paper, not volume. In the dam house, the air had the sour smell of wet cement and old metal. I set my flashlight down and pressed both palms to the handwheel for a test quarter turn gently the way Pop taught me. It should have moved like a door with well-oiled hinges. Instead, the wheel resisted tight as a jar lid in January. Don't you do that, I said, and felt it resist more. I crouched and aimed the light at the intake screen. A fine gray powder dusted the grates, clung to the frame, settled in a shallow arc where there should have been nothing but damp and a film of silt. When I tapped the screen, it sang dull instead of clean. I snapped photos, then rolled video while I brushed a fingertip across the residue. Grit broke and smeared like icing that didn't belong on anything alive. On the rim of the hatch, a smear of Quickset wore the same gray. I photographed the smear with the corner of today's paper in frame for a timestamp, then held my hand to the wheel again. Easy, I told it. We're going to do this like a Sunday door. The wheel came a fraction, then jerked, and a crack popped through the dam house like a knuckle. Chalky grit spat onto my sleeve. The spindle groaned, then stuck again. I pictured a bag of mix slid along the seam, contents poured like sand into a throat. Not enough to lock forever, just enough to make obligation look like danger. My phone buzzed in my chest pocket. I set the flashlight on a ledge and answered. Clerk's office, Amy said. Mr. Rourke. I wanted you to know, a notice of eminent domain. Hearing 2020 went out for your parcel this morning. It'll hit your mailbox today or tomorrow. Grounds, I asked. Public safety concerns regarding unregulated dam operations, she read. Mr. Rourke Caleb, there is a line here about alternative drainage infrastructure supporting adjacent residential growth. Alternative, I said, looking at the powder on my sleeve. Thanks, Amy. Will you email the hearing docket and the council's agenda item? It's on the way, she said. I'm sorry. It's weather, I said. We'll pack a coat. I hung up and set the phone to camera again. I filmed a slow pan powder on the grate smear on the rim wheel stutter and narrated date, time, and conditions. My voice sounded like I'd borrowed it from a man who slept in a chair. Back at the house, the mailbox flag stuck halfway up like it couldn't decide between hope and warning. The certified envelope wore the county's urgent fonts. I tore it on the short edge. The paper nicked my thumb, and a dot of blood stippled the stamp like a wax seal someone forgot to melt. I set the letter on the counter, took a photo with the cut visible, and slid it into a clear sleeve. "Paper beats rumor," I said aloud, trying on Doc's line to see if it fit my mouth. I dialed the fire department and left a voicemail. "Caleb Rourke on the ranch by Willow Bend Creek. Covenant maintenance required. I'll deliver formal notices in writing. Posting safety signage on the dam house. Perimeter secured." I printed 3 warning placards from Doc's template. "Caution, seasonal spillway. Maintenance, do not tamper." Laminated them under cheap plastic sleeves and laid them to cure on the workbench beside my toolbox. Rain ticked at the window, a slow Morse code for patience. The handwheel called me back like a stubborn chore. I returned to the dam house with WD-40 rags and a small wire brush. I worked the wheel a few degrees at a time. Wipe, ease, breathe. It fought like it wanted me to fail publicly. On the 4th try, it moved, then stuck, then edged forward with a hiss that felt personal. The first trickle that should have appeared in the throat didn't. The channel stayed sullen and dark. Someone tried to turn my duty into a liability, I said to the camera, and paused to steady the frame. Spillway partially operational. Evidence of a foreign material. When I killed the light, the dam house returned to its quiet rain echo. In the glass of the small pane, the bulb over the workbench made my face look like a version of me I hadn't met, older at the edges, the jaw more decided. I carried the placards to the table, wrote the weather service forecast in the corner. Rain stacking up Thursday through Sunday, then circled Thursday twice, hard enough to dent the paper. Back at the door, I looked out at the creek's surface. It lay an inch below the staff gauge line, holding like a breath that didn't trust the next one. On my porch, the golf cart had gone. The drizzle kept time. I slipped the eminent domain notice into the tin with the deed and permit and shut the lid. I checked the trail cam feed on my laptop. A raccoon at 2:13. A coyote at 3:02. At 3:27, 2 shadows by the dam house hatch when holding something like a sack. The timestamp jittered. The camera focus breathed in and out like a nervous eye. I saved the clip, labeled it, and backed it up to a little external drive that remembered things better than I did. The clock over the sink said almost 5. I refreshed email until Dana's transcript slid into the inbox like a tired boat. I filed it under Wellness 2020 and turned off the kitchen light. The window framed the dam house a square of yellow in the rain. For a second, I thought about calling the next door thread by its name. Then, I lifted my hand to the glass palm flat as if I could close the leak in the story just by holding steady. The room returned my reflection, older and more resolved. At dawn, the steel felt colder than the air. I rested my palm on the spillway wheel, counted to 6, then lifted it away to hand out formal notice flyers from a cardboard box on the levee road. The flyers were plain seasonal spillway maintenance under 1978 Permit and Agricultural Covenant. Downstream, notices sent. Fire department notified. Flow monitored. My name, parcel number, and a phone line sat at the bottom like a signature that didn't need a flourish. Folding chairs dotted the gravel like punctuation. Mrs. Chen set a thermos between 2 lawn chairs and pressed a paper cup into my hand. "Ginger tea," she said, "for cold nerves. They're warm." The nerves, I said, and the cup shook just a little anyway. A drone buzzed overhead, turned a cautious figure 8, and backed off as if the weather could swat it. Vivian stood near the silt fence with a megaphone tucked like a purse. "Neighbors," she called, voice bright and brittle, "for your safety, stay back from the device." She searched for a word that made the wheel sound criminal. "We are documenting environmental terrorism," a small boy whispered. "Mama, is it a terrorist if it wears a hat?" "Shh," the mother said, steadying his elbow. EPA Rep. Sarah Kim arrived in a windbreaker the color of a parking ticket clipboard under one arm, her smile practical. "Mr. Rourke, I'm Sarah. I'll stand where I can measure. You'll run your plan." 6 sentences, I said. "Perfect," she said. She looked past me at the sky where a bruise-colored shelf had stacked over the hills. "You picked the right dawn." Miguel Santos walked up in a clean plaid shirt and the kind of hat you keep for funerals and winds. He held a plastic sleeve full of historic irrigation photos. "My grandfather's beans, 1963, he said, tapping the first. "Water off your spillway. We made it through that summer. We're going to make it through this one," I said. I climbed the little pad and faced the small crowd. A few protest signs bobbed, protect our kids, stop the flood, but half the people had brought coolers and sat like it was a parade no one scheduled. I held a flyer up for my own courage and let the 6 sentences come out of me like I was reading them off a calm ocean. I'm performing seasonal maintenance under a 1978 permit and an agricultural covenant. Downstream notices were sent. Flow will be monitored at the staff gauge and the outlet. The fire department is notified. A safety perimeter is posted. Questions can go to EPA case number KIIM 0421. Louder Vivian called through her megaphone. "He needs accountability." "Documented," Sarah Kim said, clicking her pen. I knelt and printed the current barometer reading in my log. The needle had dived the kind of pressure fall that makes fences talk. Behind me, the creek was a held breath in a dark throat. A gust pressed everyone's jackets against their ribs. Vivian lifted her megaphone again. "He's an unstable veteran," she said, aiming her voice not at me but at the cameras. "He wants to weaponize water." Ma'am Sarah said without looking at her, "We're going to keep the measurements clean." I handed Miguel 3 flyers. "For your file," I said. He slid them into the sleeve behind the 1963 photo. "I got my file," he said, and nodded toward a little semicircle of farmers I recognized from feed store lines and county fairs. They lifted their chins in a quiet amen. The handwheel waited like a safe dial. I took one more slow breath, touched the brass valve tag on my keyring as if it could feel me back, and turned the wheel 1/4 in the direction Pop had drilled into my bones, left hand firm, right hand patient. Metal complained, then remembered its job. A low sound came up from the throat, not angry, more like relief. Water shouldered through the underground gate and found the original channel the way an old dog finds its bed. The dry scallops along the bank darkened line by line, a script reappearing from beneath erasure. A ripple slid over gravel where the decorative culverts ended, and the creek had been forced into a posture it didn't like. The flow stayed inside the historical banks. The drone dropped for a dramatic angle and then rose again, disappointed to miss a disaster. I logged the gauge flow, rising to spring average. Sarah Kim matched me with her own numbers. "Within expected historic seasonal range," she said. "Precipitation will push it, but your baseline is where it belongs." Vivian spoke into her megaphone, but her voice had to climb over a new sound, the sound of water doing what it remembers. Some of the protest signs sagged. 2 of them turned into umbrellas. A little girl in bright boots stepped to the safe edge and watched a leaf raft spin into a tiny eddy. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh but lived near one. I kept the release steady, 25% by my marks, then gave it another 5 slow as prayer. Behind me, someone said, "Look," and Miguel dipped his hand into the first clear run. He cupped water and let it thread through his fingers back to the bed. His mouth moved around a Spanish word that sounded like a thank you said to a long-absent friend. Vivian tried a new tack. "Property values," she cried. "This will destroy them." "Ma'am," Sarah said, still not looking, "you might want to review the floodplain maps from 1981. She tapped the sepia photo Miguel had propped against a folding chair. "This is not new water." A mini-cliff came as a deeper pulse moved under my boots. For a second, the creek wore a stronger face. The crowd's murmur lifted and then softened when the water stayed exactly where it should within the old curve, sliding under the cypress roots like a promise kept. The silt fence dipped and then recovered. The sandbags at the illegal elbow gave a small shrug and settled. I checked my watch and spoke the 6 sentences again for a camera a neighbor held with shaky hands. They steadied while I talked. When I finished, Mrs. Chen used her teacup as a pointer and showed a teenager the staff gauge mark where it was yesterday, where it would like to be by noon. The boy nodded as if the gauge had taught him a quiet math. Vivian's face tightened behind the giant glasses. She pointed at a faint flood mark on the far bank, a stain from years ago, where someone had planted a swing set too near the curve. "Court will shut you down tomorrow," she shouted. "This spectacle will end." Thunder rolled behind her words like a judge clearing a throat. A breeze brought the metal smell of new rain. I rested my palm on the wheel to feel the way pressure talks and took another measurement. The numbers matched Sarah's. I unleashed the dam, and the water honored the old channel I said not to the crowd but to Pop and to the paper. Note that Sarah said pen clicking. Controlled release witness present channel adherence, baseline documented. A boy and his sister kicked water at each other from the safe edge boots, slapping shrieks, small and happy. Someone opened a cooler and handed towels to people who didn't need them. It felt, for a fragile minute, like a picnic at the edge of a story written before we were born. I eased the wheel, closed 5 degrees, then let it rest where the flow held steady, a working compromise between sky and book. The drone buzzed off toward the subdivision like a wasp bored of the wrong flower. The megaphone hung from Vivian's hand like a purse that suddenly weighed more than it was worth. Miguel stood, water dripping from his knuckles. "My grandfather would have liked this sound," he said. "He left it for us," I said. Sarah tore a strip from her notes and handed it to me, EPA Kim 0421 in block letters. "If anyone questions today," she said, "you tell them you did what the Covenant told you to do." Vivian lifted the megaphone once more, voice paper thin. "Tomorrow," she said. "Court." Thunder answered again, closer now, and the air smelled like pennies and wet cedar. I tightened the wheel's lock, slipped the valve tag back against my keys, and looked down the channel where the water wrote its name in a hand older than mine. The Travis County Courthouse hummed like a hive. Reporters elbowed for angles, boom mics squeaked, and the fluorescent lights added their own nervous buzz. I stood behind Amanda Cross in the center aisle, shirt sleeves rolled, Pop's hat pinched in my hands to keep them from announcing my heart rate. "Breathe," Amanda said without turning. "We lead with paper. We end with paper." Up front, Vivian Mallory sat rigid in a black dress. Her pearl necklace ticked against itself when she whispered lines to the HOA lawyer beside her. A rumor passed down the benches someone had campaign donations tallied on a postcard, a speculative accounting of who had bought barbecue for whom. Judge Walsh entered through the side door gavel, polished smooth where fingers had worried it between decisions. "All rise," the bailiff said, and the room rose in a rustling wave. Walsh looked over the crowd, then down at the docket. "Cause number 21 to 2176, Willow Bend Meadows Homeowners Association versus Rourke." He adjusted his glasses, measured the faces, and then nodded to the HOA table. Counsel, a man with courtroom hair, stood. "Your Honor, the respondent has engaged in reckless dam manipulation resulting in property damage." He lifted a poster board, muddy photos of ruts at a construction site, a close-up of a water line that could have been from any wet morning. "These images speak for themselves." Amanda angled her legal pad. "They rarely do," she murmured. Aloud, she said, "Your Honor, we'd like those entered only after foundation is established." "Foundation will be established," the lawyer snapped. "We also have testimony that the respondent is an unstable veteran counsel." Walsh said, gavel. "Soft. Stick to facts." Vivian took a shuddering breath loud enough for the cameras. "We're just trying to protect children," she said to no one in particular, and dabbed at her eye with a tissue that didn't dare smudge her mascara. Amanda stood. "Respondent calls EPA Representative Sarah Kim." Sarah crossed to the witness seat with her clipboard and an easel stacked with flow data charts. The clerk swore her in. "Ms. Kim, Amanda said state your position." "Field Compliance, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency," Sarah said. "I responded to a call regarding seasonal spillway maintenance under a 1978 permit and observed operations on site." "Did you observe the release, Mr. Rourke performed on the morning of April 21st. "Yes." She flipped the top chart. Colored lines climbed and leveled with the neat confidence of a good instrument. Measured flow remained within historic seasonal patterns documented for Willow Bend Creek. The release adhered to the Agricultural Covenant and was announced with posted notice. No off-channel flooding was observed in the subdivision footprint. The HOA lawyer popped up. "Ms. Kim, you are not a hydrologist, correct?" "I am," Sarah said, pleasant as a parking ticket in May. "PhD, UT, Austin. Would you like my CV withdrawn?" He pivoted to the chart. "These lines could represent anything. They represent a creek that remembers itself," she said. Laughter ran the benches and then settled. Walsh lifted a hand. "Ms. Kim, keep to the data. Yes, Your Honor. Gauge readings here, here, and here." She tapped match 1981 flood documents for pre-diversion channels. The water stayed within its original banks. The respondent notified the fire department and maintained a perimeter. Amanda offered a copy of the covenant clause to the clerk. "Your Honor, the 1978 covenant recorded with the permit page 3, paragraph 6. Walsh skimmed it, lips moving on a phrase he knew he'd have to say out loud later. His thumb kneaded the gavel handle unconsciously. Amanda turned. "Respondent calls Miguel Santos." Miguel took the stand in his clean plaid and held up a photograph in a plastic sleeve. "My grandfather's garden." "Your Honor," he said, voice low, but carrying. 1963. "We irrigated from Willow Bend Creek under Mr. Rourke's spillway. Last year, after the creek was pinched, our well went shallow. The day he opened the gate, our stock tank filled for the first time in months." The HOA lawyer rose slowly. "Mr. Santos, isn't it true you oppose new homes for reasons of nostalgia?" I oppose lies, Miguel said steady, and dry creek beds. Strike the editorial, the lawyer said. Jury will disregard. Walsh said out of habit, then caught himself. No jury. The court will disregard. Amanda nodded to the gallery. Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen rose from the second row and did not need the stand. She held a faded black and white of her grandfather's garden water furrows, neat as book spines. I don't like microphones, she said, but I like tomatoes. She lifted the picture higher. With water, they are sweet. Without, they are paper. She sat. If the court had a heart, it beat then. Amanda placed a printout on the projector. Also, before the court grading permits referencing temporary redirection of flow without federal clearance and an insurance application claiming no seasonal flooding risk. We moved these into evidence. The HOA lawyer adjusted his tie. Clerical phrasing. The application was completed by a broker. We relied on professionals. And on diverting a waterway to make your pads pencil, Amanda said accent neutral but tone-edged. Vivian gripped her tissue. We believed the engineers she said not quite asked to speak. We believed the city. We believed Ms. Mallory Walsh warned. She lowered her eyes. The pearls clicked like a nervous metronome and then stilled. Amanda approached the bench with a one-page excerpt. Your Honor, one clause. Walsh took it. The room gathered itself. He read voice even, Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural rights in perpetuity. The word perpetuity hung there a clear bell that refused to stop ringing. Silence filled the room like water fills a low place. Then a scattered applause rose, soft, embarrassed, immediate. Walsh's gavel touched down. Not a threat, more like punctuation. That will be enough. Amanda looked at me once brief and grounding, then back to the bench. Your Honor, we request relief, a declaratory ruling that the respondent's operation was lawful under the covenant. An order enjoining the HOA from interfering with spillway maintenance, and referral of any permit and insurance irregularities to the appropriate agencies. The HOA lawyer tried to charge the hill. We have damage photos, context Amanda said, and tapped the easel. Rain before pads, not after release. Flow charts on record. EPA testimony on record. Fire chief letter on record. Fire Chief Martinez Walsh said, Is the chief present? A man in a Navy uniform stood. Here, Your Honor. Did you receive notice? Yes. Radio acknowledgement at EO 610. We monitored. No emergency calls during or after the operation. Signage adequate. Procedure calm. Vivian stood tissue crumpled. He humiliated us, she said, voice fraying. He opened that thing to make us look. Walsh raised the gavel an inch. Miss Mallory, sit down. She did. The judge looked at the covenant again, then at Sarah's charts, then at the photos of gardens that had outlived their photographers. He set the gavel down as if it might bruise the wood. The court finds the respondent's actions fall squarely within the covenant obligations and the recorded permit. The HOA is enjoined from interfering with lawful spillway maintenance. Allegations regarding permit compliance and insurance representations are referred to agencies with jurisdiction. He hesitated, the politician and the man sharing a single face. And this court reminds all parties that stewardship, not spectacle, is the heart of these rules. Amanda exhaled in a way only I heard. My hands found the brim of Pop's hat, and the felt gave back a familiar pressure. The gallery shifted relief curiosity and the first bright edges of vindication. The HOA lawyer leaned toward Vivian and whispered too loudly, Will appeal. She shook him off, stood, and forced a smile at the nearest camera. This isn't over, she said, storming out without the storm she wanted. Reporters circled like gulls, questions pecking at her shoulders as the door sighed shut. Amanda gathered our exhibits with 2 efficient sweeps. We'll get the transcript, she said, and send certified copies of the order. Then you go home and eat something that didn't come from a vending machine. Judge said perpetuity, I said, as if repeating it could make it permanent in the air. He did. She tucked the covenant back into the folder. Now we turn perpetuity into practice. Outside, the food trucks had kept their vigil smoke from brisket drifting over the courthouse steps in a smell that made the whole thing feel more human. Miguel waited by the rail and clasped my shoulder. My tank is full, he said simply. Mrs. Chen pressed a still warm sesame cookie into my palm. For tomatoes, she said, which was her way of saying for everything else too. On the plaza, a circle of microphones had already formed around the idea of a quote. I kept mine short the way Doc Keene would want. The court affirmed what the papers already said. We'll keep water where it belongs. A camera light blinked. A boom mic dipped. Somewhere up the block, thunder shuffled its feet late to the scene. The newsletter came off my home printer with the toner a shade too light, like even the machine didn't believe it. Board dissolves. The headline read the serif letters a little fuzzy where the feed had slipped. I thumbtacked it to the corkboard beside the HOA Dissolution Filing 2023, the stamped page I preferred to the goodbye note. Paper then echoes. Outside, cedar smoke drifted from the burn barrel where I fed deadfall into a steady, slow flame. In the workshop, the spillway tools hung clean on their hooks, handles oiled, teeth aligned. I set the gear oil can on the bench and chalked today's date on the slate above it. The dam house had become a place that smelled more like machine rooms than arguments. I liked it that way. On the levee road, rebar stacks sprouted pale rust stains that bled down their sides the color of dried pomegranates. No crews, no pallets. A hawk circled above idle bulldozers, letting the thermals do the work. Nature has a slower voice than people, but when you learn its verbs, you hear repossession. The handwheel had gained back its good manners. I opened the hatch and set the lamp so it lit the throat like a small stage. The gear teeth took a drop of oil, each quiet as a rosary. When I brushed the casing, a last flake of grit pinged onto the sill, a white petal from an old mean flower. I kept it in a film can with the rest the visual sermon I show visitors when they ask what tampering looks like. The wheel turned a quarter, then back silk on steel. Footsteps on gravel. I didn't look up until the shadow touched my boots. "Brought you something that claims to be coffee," Doc Keene said, holding out a dented thermos with a sticker that had once advertised the Willow Bend Diner and now advertised time. He looked older, like someone had penciled new lines into the margins, but the eyes were the same steady, a little amused, tuned for both trouble and decency. "What's the verdict?" I asked, taking a swallow. It tasted like the diner had steeped a gavel. "Drinkable in a courtroom," he said. He leaned against the doorframe, hands in the pockets, and watched the wheel move. "Sounds right." It remembered, I said, after we cleaned it down to its bones. He nodded at the flake in the film can. "Keep that. People believe stories when they can hear them rattle." I set the can on the shelf beside the EPA note and my flow logs bound with a fat rubber band. "You were right about keeping sentences short," I said. "I'm often right about boring things," he said. "How's the paper stack?" I gestured at the file boxes stacked against the back wall. Their labels were square and calm. Covenant, permit notices, transcripts, insurance. Brick-colored banker's boxes that had become actual bricks. "We're past the part where rumor throws a punch," I said. "Now it just sulks on the curb." Doc blew across his thermos, then sipped. "I read Walsh's order twice. He used your favorite word. Perpetuity," I said. A judge's attempt at immortality," he said. "You know what it means for you, of course. Obligation," I said, "until somebody else has steadier hands." He tipped the thermos toward the handwheel. "Obligation flows as long as you do." We watched the lamp gather a small halo dust and then let it go. Outside, a truck honked twice and rolled up under the live oaks. Neighbors climbed down with folding chairs and the kind of pies that sweat through aluminum lids. "Fall BBQ on the calendar," Frank called in, holding up a stack of flyers. "We're test running for Creek Days." "I have work," I said. "You have to eat," Doc said. "That's in the covenant, too, somewhere between 'thou shalt grease fittings' and 'thou shalt attend potlucks.'" He followed me out to the yard where a rectangle of sun warmed the tailgate. We spread the BBQ flyers and a draft bylaws sheet on the metal, the paper fluttering when a breeze took a breath. The flyer headline carried a promise in cheerful fonts. "Creek Days, water flows, so will." Music. Beneath it, a schedule. Kids casting clinic, invasive plant pull. Birdwalk brisket at 5. "Who wrote this?" I asked. "Everyone," Frank said. "Which is why we need you and Doc to edit. Start with verbs," Doc said. "End with verbs." The meeting was half business, half neighborly interruption. We stood around the burn barrel with clipboards and made a vote of it voices instead of hands because it felt more like singing. The name came easy, Creek Restoration Association. No dues, yet just promises, and a coffee can where promises sometimes land. Mrs. Chen wrote minutes in her looping hand on a pad that already bore grocery lists, and that felt exactly right. "I'll register the nonprofit," I said. "You'll let someone else fill out the parts that ask for serial numbers," Doc said. "I'll let someone else fill out the parts that ask for serial numbers," I repeated. He grinned. "Good. Brisket duty, I can pull," I said. "Delegate," he said. So I handed the tongs to Miguel, who looked like he'd been waiting his whole life for that exact handoff. Back in the shop, I pulled the HOA dissolution filing from the corkboard and slipped it into a plastic sleeve. The ink held steady under the plastic sheen, the county stamp a little off-center, human and official at once. Doc tapped the sleeve with a knuckle. "That's a pretty thing for a certain stripe of pretty. It doesn't smell like cedar or tomatoes," I said, "but it breathes easier." He drummed the hat brim on his thigh thoughtfully. "You know what the creek taught all of us? That weird metaphors work if you lean hard enough," I said. "That too," he said. "But more legacy isn't a monument. It's a practice. You don't win a creek, you tend it." I set the sleeve on the bench and slid the newsletter beside it. "The board wrote their monologue," I said. "We'll write a schedule." He laughed, a short bark that softened on the way out. "Paper beats rumor every time." We stood quiet for a small wedge of afternoon, listening to the barbecue argue with the breeze. A radio played from somebody's truck steel guitar and local ads. The hawk drifted lower, decided against us, and climbed again toward a sky that had traded summer's glare for fall's patience. Doc pointed at the hatch. "Turn it. I did a slow eighth." The water below murmured approval without asking for an audience. "I'll put together a stewardship calendar," he said. Quarterly checks. Community trainings. Kids reading the staff gauge. People remember a number better when they call it out loud. Call and response, I said. Church by the creek. Same hymn, different hymnals, he said, and tucked the thermos under his arm. At the fence, Mrs. Chen pinned a square of canvas that said Pumpkin Chili Bake-Off with a paintbrush that had seen better edges. Frank dragged a smoker into shade. Somebody's dog made a circuit like an usher. I carried the file boxes to the storage room, stacked them in a new order that made sense for a future me permit, covenant, operations, community. When I closed the door, the corridor looked lighter, like we'd moved a weight from it to somewhere that could carry weight. On the bench, the first printed flyer for Creek Days waited with its corner curled, the ink still a little wet. At water flows, so will music. I pressed it flat with my palm and felt the vibration from the handwheel hum faintly through the concrete, a good instrument in a good key. "Come eat," Miguel called. "Brisket, 1. We voted, I asked. We tasted, he said. "Same thing." Doc handed me my hat. "Go, before they form a committee about it." As we stepped into the late light, the hawk pivoted toward the creek and then away again, as if confirming nothing required rescue. I glanced back at the shop window and caught my reflection tired, the edges sanded, a kind of cautious hope written where worry used to live. At the table, neighbors made room with the instinct of people who've stood through long services and know when to slide down the pew. Someone set a plate in my hands. Another topped my tea with something that tasted like September. I held out the dissolution notice to Doc like a man passing a baton he never wanted to carry. He read the line about the board's vote, then the date, and he laughed the way you laugh when a stone finally rolls off a field you've plowed around for years. "Paper beats rumor," he said again, and clicked his cup to mine. Down at the creek, the water laid its quiet pulses along the bank like a metronome teaching patience. The thermos sat on the tailgate, still warm. I looked at the flyer one more time and thought about the practice of legacy and how tomorrow's work would start exactly where today's ended, at the wheel and in the minutes. The first horn note found the curve of the water and laid itself along it like a ribbon. A brass band in the matching shirts took a cautious step into a march, then 2. The snare settled them. Children chased kites that bumped against pockets of breeze tails, pricking the blue. I set Pop's cowboy hat on a fence post where he used to lean and count cattle brim facing the creek as if it could still see. The spillway wheel caught the morning fresh paint tight as new skin, yet the old initials PM still rode the metal just beneath the shine. I ran a thumb across them and felt the nicked edges, the way letters remember the hand that carved them. Under the sycamores booths rimmed the grass, BBQ breathing smoke tamales stacked in warmers, iced tea sweating into paper cups. The banner overhead said Creek Days in letters that borrowed their confidence from the sky. To the right, kids stood at the staff gauge calling out numbers like a game. To the left, a table of old photographs gathered stories like bees. "Ready?" Doc Keene asked, falling into step beside me. He wore a clean shirt that didn't pretend to iron and a grin that couldn't hide pride. "As I'll ever be," I said. My voice came out lighter, an unfamiliar but welcome register. We stood on a little plywood riser someone had convinced into a stage. Miguel adjusted a microphone down for his daughter, who grinned at the crowd and then at the creek and forgot the mic while she waved at both. Mrs. Chen fussed with a vase of wildflowers and whispered, "Don't tip the water, it makes the stems sulk." I raised a hand. The band unclenched and set their horns at their sides, bells winking. Neighbors drifted closer until the murmur braided itself into a soft hush. "Welcome," I said. "You made this." "Say it again," Doc muttered, hands together once like a clap held in. I did. "We made this," I said, and the hush answered like a yes. Scene A came first, the one with the small hands. Children lined the bank with grocery store bouquets cut down to creek size. On Doc's nod, they dropped flowers into the current petals, riding the light like brave boats. Mrs. Chen stepped to the microphone with the paper she'd lettered in her careful hand. Restoration Proclamation. She read without hurry. Whereas the creek has a memory older than any of us, whereas documents, neighbors, and time agree on its path, whereas stewardship is a practice and not a statue, we mark this day to keep faith with the wheel, the water, and one another. She looked up, eyes shiny but dry. We proclaim this creek restored and ourselves with it. Applause rose and found the cottonwoods. A boy yelled, "Again," and then hid embarrassed by the echo he'd made. At the scholarship table, a poster waited Pop Morrison Environmental Award with a photograph of Pop in his Sunday shirt beside the dam in 1978, a pencil behind his ear like an antenna tuned to usefulness. Scene B began with a bell from the band's trombonist, the universal cue for attention that predates microphones. Education, I said, palm on the poster. Pop believed in learning how things work and keeping them that way. So today we endow the Pop Morrison Environmental Award, small to start big in intention. I held up the certificate and read the first recipient's name. Maria Santos, for study in environmental engineering at UT Austin. Maria's hands flew to her face. Miguel laughed and wiped his eye with the heel of his hand. Doc nudged me. "Good paper," he said. Maria hugged the certificate like a life ring, then surprised me by taking the mic. "I'm going to make creeks behave," she said, then corrected herself. "I'm going to help them be." The crowd loved that, and so did the water. I wiped my palms on my jeans. Scene C waited the one with the wheel. People eased closer, careful as if approaching a skittish animal they meant to befriend. The band found a soft hymn they could play without words. I placed my fingers on the spokes where Pops had lived, felt the temperature of the metal, the weight that years and fresh coats and old duty give to an object. Ceremonial Doc whispered. "Not dramatic," I said. "Never," he said, pleased. I turned the spillway wheel not as engineer, but as neighbor, a quarter to open the channel to sun, then another hair to let it clear its throat. Water arced around the lip and murmured a low vowel that tasted like pennies and cedar. The applause that lifted had a texture to it, the sound of people clapping for something outside themselves. Steady, Sarah Kim called from the gauge clipboard, reflex intact, even off-duty. Historic spring line. I nodded and breathed. The initials PM flashed once beneath the paint and then settled as if to say they approved the layer that let them keep their job. At the edge of the crowd, a figure in a pale dress hesitated. Vivian. No megaphone, no pearls. She stood where the shade had stitched itself to the bank and held her own arms. A camera hung off a strap at her hip, lens cap on like an apology that didn't know its lines. She took a step forward, then stopped when the applause swelled the wheel bright under everyone's eyes. She looked at the water, the way people look at a hard truth they're practicing believing. Then she turned and stayed, which was more than I'd expected and exactly enough for a day built on practice. "Say something," Doc said low. "Short," I said. "Always," he said. I lifted the mic and let the wind adjust it. "We had documents," I said, "but we also had neighbors. Today, we trade winning for tending. We keep the wheel oiled. We read the gauge. We teach the kids the numbers and the names of birds. We clean up after ourselves. We tell the truth in paper and in person. And we let the water be where it knows to be." The band picked up the hymn and slid it gently into a two-step. Tamales traded hands, iced tea, found new thirsts. A woman I didn't know pressed a flag of bluebonnets into my palm, her kid's art class contribution, and asked where to tape it. "Anywhere that needs a little Texas," I said. A kid in rain boots ran up to the gauge and hollered .62. At the exact same moment, Sarah scribbled 0.62. The crowd cheered the coincidence like a magic trick. The kid lifted both hands high like a quarterback and then tripped over nothing. Recovered and bowed. I walked the bank with Miguel, the two of us touching leaves like we could count restoration by fingertips. "You hear it?" he asked. "I do," I said. "It sounds like my grandfather," he said. "Not his voice, his work." We stopped at the fence post with Pop's hat. I straightened the brim. He'd hate the speeches, I said. He'd love the kites, Miguel said, and we watched 2 of them tack in the wind, make mistakes, and try again. Near the stage, Mrs. Chen held up a jar of tomato seedlings and auctioned them off for the association fund. With water, these will brag, she said. Bids came not in numbers, but in groceries promised for the next potluck. We called it even, and took 3 jars home. Sun slid toward late. Shadows lengthened and softened at the same time, a trick I never get tired of. A last stack of brisket found homes. Someone started the bird walk, and a cluster of kids followed, whispering as if the trees could fail a test if they were too loud. I returned to the wheel, and for the ceremony's end, turned it back a tee's width, the kind of adjustment that says a day has handed off to an evening. I rested my palm on the hub and felt the temperature shift cooler, now edges less insistent. The creek answered with a modest shush, the sound of a page turned carefully. Down by the shade line, Vivian watched 1 more minute, then slipped away among booths and folding chairs. Her absence drowned not by malice, but by music and a river of small talk. No grand exit, no proclamation. Just a person learning what she could live with in a place that had decided to live differently. Speech done, Doc said. He clapped once, not to start anything, just to mark the end. I leaned toward the wheel and let the line I'd carried all this way finally escape in a voice that belonged to the creek as much as to me. Watched it flow, I said, half to Pop's hat, half to the initials under paint, all the way to everyone clapping along with the brass. Sunset gathered the bank into amber. The water murmured steady stitching. The day closed. Someone started a call and response song they'd practiced at church and finished at picnics, and the last horn note lifted a little higher than it needed to, and then let go. We stayed a while because staying is a ceremony too. Flags ripple above the festival grounds while the smell of BBQ lingers in the twilight, and I rest my hand on the newly painted wheel. That wheel, once jammed and bitter with dust, now turns freely a sign that obligation can be repaired, not just endured. Together, we reclaimed boundaries, corrected the record, and found that justice isn't loud. It's steady. Watching children laugh at the water's edge reminded me that healing is a communal act, not a private victory. Share your own HOA stories or lessons in the comments below. I'd like to hear them.